The alarm screamed across Titan Station as another wave of enemy fire slammed into the outer shields. Commander Jake Harrison gripped the rail of the command deck and watched the tactical display show red warning lights everywhere. His station was humanity's last hope in this sector, and the aliens were tearing it apart piece by piece. Lieutenant Amy Foster ran her fingers across the control panel and shook her head. The numbers were all bad. 3 more human ships had gone dark in the last 10 minutes, and their shields were down to 30% power. The Zephyrian fleet had them surrounded, and every shot they fired seemed to do nothing against those strange crystal ships. Jake looked out the main viewing window at the battle raging in space around them. Human ships darted between the massive, alien vessels like insects fighting giants. The Zephyrian warships were beautiful in a terrible way, with their smooth crystal hulls that seemed to bend light around them. When human weapons hit them, the energy just got sucked up and then fired right back twice as strong. Captain Ben Rodriguez was out there somewhere in his ship, the UES Defiant, trying to break through the enemy lines. Jake had lost contact with him an hour ago, but the sensors still showed his ship moving and fighting. That was something, at least. Ben was a good captain, and if anyone could find a way through this mess, it would be him. The deck shook again, and sparks flew from a control station. Amy grabbed onto her chair to keep from falling and then got right back to work. She was the best tactical officer Jake had ever served with, and she never gave up even when things looked impossible. Right now, things looked very impossible. Dr. Helen Martinez burst through the doors of the command center with her tablet in her hands and sweat on her face. She had been working in the research labs since the attack started, trying to find some weakness in the alien technology. Her team had been scanning every bit of data they could get on the Zephyrian weapons, but so far they had found nothing useful. Helen rushed over to Jake and Amy. The lab readings showed that the alien weapons worked on some kind of quantum level that human science barely understood. The crystal hulls of their ships could absorb almost any kind of energy and then redirect it back as a weapon. It was like fighting an enemy that got stronger every time you hit them. Jake nodded and looked back at the tactical display. The enemy fleet had moved into a perfect sphere around Titan Station and was slowly tightening the circle. Their plan was clear. They wanted to capture the station intact, probably to study human technology. That meant they would try to board. Soon, instead of just blowing everything up, Amy's console beeped with an incoming message from Captain Rodriguez. His voice came through filled with static and the sound of explosions in the background. His ship had taken heavy damage, but he was still fighting. The Defiant had lost most of its weapons, and the engines were running at half power. Rodriguez said he would try to ram one of the alien motherships if he could get close enough. Jake told him to hold position and wait for orders. Ramming attacks were a last resort, and they were not there yet. There had to be another way to break through the enemy lines. Humans had always found a way to win against impossible odds. This time would be no different. Down in the research labs, Dr. Kevin Wright was working with Helen's team to analyze the quantum signatures from the alien weapons. They had managed to capture some data when a Zephyrian shot had passed close to their sensors without hitting anything. The readings were unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was as if the aliens had learned to use the basic forces of the universe as weapons. Kevin ran the numbers through the station's computer systems, but kept getting the same answer. Human technology was at least 1,000 years behind what the Zephyrians were using. Their ships were powered by some kind of zero-point energy system, and their weapons could manipulate matter at the atomic level. Fighting them with conventional weapons was like trying to stop a tank with a bow and arrow. The station shook again, and this time the lights flickered. Jake looked at Amy and saw the fear in her eyes, even though she was trying to hide it. The shields were down to 20% and falling fast. If they dropped below 10%, the aliens would be able to beam boarding parties directly onto the station. Ensign Lisa Chang was working at the communication station, trying to send out distress calls to any human ships in the area. Most of the long-range transmitters had been damaged in the first wave of attacks, but she had managed to get one working on a backup power supply. The signal was weak, but it was broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. Lisa turned to Jake and shook her head. No one was answering the distress calls. Every human ship in the sector was either destroyed or too badly damaged to help. Titan Station was truly alone against the Zephyrian fleet. Jake made a decision. He ordered all non-essential personnel to the escape pods and evacuation shuttles. If the station was going to fall, he wanted to save as many lives as possible. The military personnel would stay and fight to the end, but the civilians and support staff needed to get away while they still could. Amy protested that the evacuation ships would never make it past the alien blockade, but Jake insisted some of them might get through, and that was better than none. The escape pods were small and fast and might be able to slip past the enemy sensors. Helen refused to leave her lab. She said that if there was any chance of finding a weakness in the alien technology, she needed to keep working. Her team felt the same way. They would stay and keep researching until the very end. Maybe they would find something that could help other human colonies defend themselves. The Zephyrian ships began to move closer to the station. Their crystal hulls glowed with stored energy from all the human weapons that had hit them. Soon, they would be close enough to start the boarding process. Jake ordered all security teams to defensive positions and made sure everyone had weapons and ammunition. Ben Rodriguez made one last attempt to break through the enemy lines with the Defiant. His ship charged straight at the nearest Zephyrian mothership with all remaining power going to the engines. The aliens seemed surprised by the desperate attack, and several of their smaller ships moved to intercept. The Defiant took hit after hit, but kept moving forward. Rodriguez was trying to get close enough to use his ship as a bomb, but the alien weapons were tearing his hull apart. Just when it looked like he might make it through, the mothership fired a massive beam that cut the Defiant in half. Jake watched his friend's ship explode on the tactical display and felt something cold settle in his stomach. Ben Rodriguez had been like a brother to him, and now he was gone along with his entire crew. The aliens had taken everything from humanity, and now they wanted Titan Station too. The enemy ships moved into final position around the station, and Jake could see small craft launching from their bays. The boarding parties were coming, and there was nothing left to stop them. Jake looked around the command center at his officers and crew. They all knew what was coming, but none of them showed any sign of giving up. Amy reported that the shields were down to 15% and falling. The first enemy boarding craft would reach the station in less than 10 minutes. Jake ordered all departments to prepare for close combat and to destroy any important data or equipment that could not be defended. Helen looked up from her tablet one last time and shook her head. Her team had found nothing that could help them fight the Zephyrian technology. The aliens were simply too advanced and too powerful, but she promised to keep working even if enemy soldiers were breaking down the lab doors. Jake took a deep breath and prepared to give the order to fight to the last person when Amy's console lit up with a new contact on the long-range sensors. Something big was coming in from the outer system, moving fast toward the battle. It was not broadcasting any identification codes and did not match any known ship design in their databases. Lieutenant Amy Foster stared at her sensor display and blinked several times to make sure she was reading it correctly. The contact was massive and moving at speeds that should have been impossible for something that size. She ran a quick scan and got readings that made no sense at all. The ship appeared to be over 3 kilometers long and was approaching from the direction of the outer gas giants. Commander Jake Harrison moved behind Amy's station and looked at the display himself. The unknown vessel was definitely not human, and it did not match any Zephyrian design in their databases. The hull configuration was unlike anything he had ever seen, with smooth curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. There were no visible weapons or engine ports, which was strange for a ship that large. Amy tried to get a better scan, but their sensors had been damaged in the battle and were only working at half power. What she could tell was that the mystery ship was old, very old. The metal composition showed signs of age that suggested it had been flying through space for thousands of years. How that was possible, she had no idea. The Zephyrian fleet had also detected the new arrival, and their boarding craft were slowing down as they tried to figure out what they were dealing with. The crystal ships began to reposition themselves to face this new threat while still maintaining their siege of Titan Station. Their weapons started to glow as they charged up for another attack. Communications specialist Ryan Adams was frantically trying to establish contact with the unknown vessel. He sent messages on every frequency that his damaged equipment could reach, but got nothing back except static. The ship seemed to be listening because the static patterns changed when he transmitted, but there was no clear response. Jake ordered Ryan to keep trying while Amy worked on getting better sensor readings. If this new ship was hostile, then Titan Station was caught between two enemy forces. If it was friendly, then maybe they had a chance to survive this battle after all. Either way, they needed to know what they were dealing with. Dr. Helen Martinez came running back into the command center with her tablet and Dr. Kevin Wright right behind her. They had been monitoring the energy readings from the mystery ship, and the results were incredible. The vessel was putting out power signatures that were off the charts. Whatever was driving that ship was more advanced than anything humans or Zephyrians had ever built. Kevin showed Jake the readings on his tablet. The unknown ship was using some kind of energy source that their sensors could barely detect. It was not fusion power or antimatter or anything else in human science books. The power output was so high that it should have torn the ship apart, but somehow the hull was containing all that energy without any problems. Helen pointed out that the ship's approach vector was very precise. It was not drifting or following a random course through space. Someone or something was piloting that vessel with great skill, and they were heading straight for the battle zone. The question was whether they planned to help the humans or join the Zephyrian attack. Amy's sensors picked up more details as the mystery ship got closer. The hull was covered in markings that looked like writing, but not in any language she recognized. There were also structures on the surface that might have been weapons or sensor arrays, but they were so different from human designs that she could not be sure. The Zephyrian motherships were getting nervous about the new arrival. Several of them broke off from the siege formation and moved to intercept the unknown vessel. Their crystal hulls were glowing brighter as they charged their quantum weapons to full power. If the mystery ship was a threat, they intended to destroy it before it could interfere with their conquest of Titan Station. Jake watched the tactical display as the first Zephyrian ships approached the unknown vessel. The aliens were moving in their standard attack formation, with the larger ships providing cover for the smaller ones. They had used this same pattern to destroy dozens of human fleets, and it had never failed them before. Ryan suddenly got excited as his communications equipment picked up a signal from the mystery ship. It was not on any standard frequency, and the transmission was heavily encrypted, but it was definitely an attempt at communication. He worked to clean up the signal and run it through the station's translation computers. The message was short and seemed to be repeating the same pattern over and over. Ryan isolated the signal and fed it into every decryption program they had, but nothing worked. The language was completely unknown and did not match anything in their databases. It was as if someone had invented an entirely new way of speaking. Amy reported that the Zephyrian ships were almost in weapons range of the unknown vessel. The crystal ships were moving in perfect formation, and their quantum disruptors were fully charged. In a few more minutes they would open fire, and the mystery ship would face the same devastating attack that had destroyed the human fleet. But the unknown vessel did not seem concerned about the approaching threat. It maintained its course and speed without any attempt to evade or prepare for battle. There were no visible shields going up and no weapons being charged. Either the pilot was supremely confident, or they did not understand the danger they were flying into. Jake had seen too many good ships destroyed by Zephyrian weapons to believe that anyone could survive their attack without proper defenses. The quantum disruptors could tear through any known armor and shields like they were made of paper. Even if the mystery ship was more advanced than human technology, it would still take damage from those terrible weapons. The first Zephyrian mothership fired its main weapon at the unknown vessel. The quantum beam was bright enough to light up the entire battle zone and packed enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Jake expected to see the mystery ship torn apart, just like all the human vessels that had faced those weapons. But something impossible happened. The quantum beam hit the unknown ship's hull and simply vanished. There was no explosion or damage or even a visible impact. The energy just disappeared, as if it had never existed at all. The mystery ship continued on its course without slowing down or changing direction. Amy stared at her sensors in disbelief. According to her readings, the quantum beam had definitely hit the target, but there was no energy discharge or hull damage. It was as if the mystery ship had absorbed the entire attack without taking any harm at all. That should have been completely impossible. The Zephyrian ship seemed just as confused as the humans. Their perfect formation wavered as the crystal ships tried to understand what had just happened. They fired again with multiple weapons, all targeting the same spot on the mystery ship's hull. The result was exactly the same. All that destructive energy just vanished into nothing. Dr. Helen Martinez was frantically taking readings and comparing them to what they knew about Zephyrian technology. The quantum weapons were designed to disrupt matter at the atomic level, but somehow the mystery ship was immune to their effects. The hull material must be made of something that could absorb or deflect quantum energy. Kevin was running calculations on his tablet and shaking his head. The amount of energy that the mystery ship had absorbed would have been enough to power Titan Station for a year. Where was all that power going, and how was the ship containing it without exploding? The physics involved were beyond anything human science could explain. The unknown vessel finally responded to the Zephyrian attack. Sections of its hull began to glow with a soft blue light, and structures that had been hidden became visible. What Amy had thought might be weapons or sensors were definitely weapons. They looked nothing like human or Zephyrian designs, but there was no mistaking their purpose. Ryan's communications equipment suddenly came alive with a clear transmission from the mystery ship. The signal was strong, and on a frequency that human equipment could receive without any problems. But the message itself was still in that unknown language that their computers could not translate. Jake listened to the transmission and felt something strange. The words were completely foreign, but there was something familiar about the rhythm and tone. It reminded him of something from his childhood, but he could not remember what. The voice speaking had an accent that sounded almost human, but not quite. Amy's tactical display showed that the mystery ship was changing course to intercept more Zephyrian vessels. Its weapons were fully active now, and energy readings were climbing to levels that their sensors could barely measure. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to be spectacular. The Zephyrian fleet regrouped and formed a battle line facing the unknown vessel. Every ship in their force was charging weapons and preparing for a massive coordinated attack. They had never encountered anything that could resist their quantum disruptors, but they were not giving up without a fight. Helen noticed something important in her readings. The mystery ship's energy signature was fluctuating in a pattern that matched human brainwaves. It was subtle, but definitely there. Somehow this alien vessel was synchronized with human neural patterns. That could not be a coincidence. The unknown ship opened fire with weapons that looked like streams of liquid light. When they hit the Zephyrian crystal ships, there was no absorption or redirection of energy. The alien hulls simply cracked and shattered like glass. For the first time in the war, someone had found weapons that could actually hurt the Zephyrians. The mystery ship's weapons continued to tear through the Zephyrian formation with devastating precision. Each shot found its target, and each target was destroyed completely. The crystal ships that had seemed so powerful against human weapons were falling like leaves in a storm. Commander Jake Harrison watched the tactical display in amazement as the tide of battle shifted dramatically. Communications specialist Ryan Adams was still trying to decode the transmissions from the unknown vessel. The language patterns were becoming clearer, but they were unlike anything in human databases. Then suddenly his equipment picked up a new transmission on a different frequency. This one was weaker, but there was something about it that made him sit up straight in his chair. Ryan isolated the signal and ran it through a different set of translation programs. These were older systems designed to decode ancient human languages that were no longer spoken. To his surprise, the computer found a partial match. The transmission was being sent in something that resembled Proto-Human, which was a theoretical language that scientists believed all Earth languages had evolved from. Dr. Carol Johnson was the station's top linguist, and Ryan called her to the command center immediately. When she arrived, she took one look at the decoded transmission and her face went pale. The words were archaic and formal, but she could make out their meaning. The message was simple but earth-shaking. Children of Terra, you fight with honor. We remember the old compact. Jake stared at Dr. Johnson in disbelief. Terra was the ancient name for Earth, and the message seemed to suggest that whoever was in that mystery ship knew about humanity's home world. But how was that possible, when humans had only been in space for a few hundred years and had never encountered any other intelligent species before the Zephyrians? Lieutenant Amy Foster was monitoring the battle and reported that the unknown vessel had destroyed over half of the Zephyrian attack force. The remaining crystal ships were trying to retreat, but the mystery ship was pursuing them with relentless efficiency. Its weapons had a much longer range than anything the Zephyrians possessed and could strike targets with perfect accuracy. Dr. Johnson worked frantically to translate more of the incoming transmissions. The proto-human language was incredibly complex and had variations that human linguists had only theorized about. But as she decoded more messages, the picture became clearer. The beings on the mystery ship were claiming to be human, or at least related to humanity in some way. Major Dan Cooper was the station's intelligence officer, and he joined the group around Dr. Johnson's translation station. His job was to analyze threats and opportunities, and right now he was very confused. If the mystery ship really contained humans, then where had they come from, and why had they never made contact before? The transmission changed again, and this time it was much clearer. The speaker identified themselves as Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran remnant vessel Wanderer. She was requesting permission to establish direct communication with the commanders of Titan Station. Her voice had a strange accent, but it was definitely human. Jake authorized the communication link, and within minutes Captain Vasquez appeared on the main viewing screen. She looked completely human, but there were subtle differences. Her skin had a slight metallic sheen, and her eyes were a color that did not quite exist in normal human genetics. She wore a uniform that was clearly military, but the design was unlike anything in human space forces. Captain Vasquez spoke in heavily accented English that took some effort to understand. She explained that her people were descendants of humans who had left Earth during the first great expansion thousands of years before recorded history. They called themselves the Terran Remnant, and had been wandering the galaxy ever since, searching for their origins. The story she told was incredible. According to Vasquez, her ancestors had possessed technology far beyond what modern humans had developed. They had built great ships and traveled to distant stars long before humans on Earth had even invented writing. But something had gone wrong, and they had been cut off from their homeworld for millennia. Amy interrupted to report that the Zephyrian ships in the immediate area had been completely destroyed or driven off. The space around Titan Station was clear for the first time since the siege had begun. The Wanderer was now holding position just outside the station's defensive perimeter, and its weapons were powered down. Dr. Helen Martinez had been analyzing the energy readings from the Wanderer during the battle. The ship's power systems were based on principles that human science barely understood. They seemed to tap directly into the quantum foam that underlied all reality and convert virtual particles into usable energy. It was technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans or Zephyrians had developed. Captain Vasquez continued her explanation. The Terran Remnant had been watching human expansion into space for the past several decades. They had seen the colonies grow and spread across nearby star systems. But they had also detected the approach of the Zephyrian fleet, and knew that their distant cousins were in terrible danger. The Zephyrians were not just another alien species, according to Vasquez. They were a plague that had been spreading across the galaxy for thousands of years, consuming every civilization they encountered. Her people had fought them before, and knew how dangerous they were. The crystal ships were just the advanced scouts for a much larger force. Jake asked how many Zephyrian ships they were actually facing, and the answer was terrifying. The main fleet contained thousands of vessels, including motherships the size of small moons. They had the power to sterilize entire worlds, and had done so countless times before. Humanity's colonies would not survive the coming assault without help. But Captain Vasquez offered hope along with the grim news. The Terran Remnant had been developing weapons and defenses specifically designed to fight the Zephyrians. Their technology could be adapted to work with human equipment and ships. If the descendants of Earth worked together, they might have a chance to survive. Dr. Kevin Wright was taking detailed notes on everything Vasquez was saying about Zephyrian technology and tactics. The quantum disruptors that had seemed so devastating had a critical weakness. They required a specific frequency resonance to disrupt matter, and if that frequency could be blocked or altered, the weapons became useless. The Wanderer's hull was covered with a special material that absorbed quantum energy and converted it into usable power. This was why the Zephyrian weapons had no effect on the ancient ship. The same technology could be applied to human vessels, but it would require modifications to their hull plating and power systems. Amy was already running calculations on how long it would take to retrofit the surviving human ships. With the Wanderer's help and technical specifications, they could modify at least some of their fleet before the main Zephyrian armada arrived. It would not be enough to match the enemy's numbers, but it might give them a fighting chance. Captain Vasquez warned that they did not have much time. Her long-range sensors had detected the Zephyrian main fleet accelerating toward the system. They would arrive within days rather than weeks. Every human ship that could be modified would need to work around the clock to prepare for the coming battle. Dr. Johnson had been studying the linguistic patterns in Vasquez's speech and made an important discovery. The accent and word choices matched theoretical models of how human language might have evolved over thousands of years of isolation. This provided strong evidence that the Terran remnant really were descended from ancient Earth colonists. Jake made the decision to accept the remnant's offer of alliance. Humanity needed every advantage they could get against the Zephyrian threat. He authorized full cooperation between human and remnant technical teams and ordered all available personnel to begin retrofit operations immediately. The Wanderer moved closer to Titan Station and extended docking tubes to allow direct transfer of personnel and equipment. Captain Vasquez would come aboard with her senior officers to coordinate the defense preparations. Her chief engineer, Commander Nick Stevens, had detailed knowledge of the modifications needed to make human weapons effective against Zephyrian shields. As the two groups of humans began working together, Jake felt a mixture of hope and amazement. Humanity was no longer alone in the galaxy. They had family among the stars, even if that family had been separated for thousands of years. The reunion was taking place in the shadow of terrible danger, but it was still a moment that would change everything. Dr. Martinez established a joint research project with the remnant scientists to study Zephyrian technology and develop countermeasures. Their combined knowledge might be enough to find weaknesses that neither group could have discovered alone. The children of Terra were finally working together again. But even as the alliance took shape, everyone knew that the real test was still coming. The Zephyrian main fleet would not be caught off guard like the advanced scouts had been. They would arrive in overwhelming force and with full knowledge of what they were facing. The united descendants of Earth would need every advantage they could create to survive the coming storm. Chief Engineer Paul Jackson had never worked so hard in his entire career. For the past 18 hours, he and his teams had been retrofitting human ships with Terran remnant technology. The modifications were complex and required complete rewiring of weapon systems and hull plating. But with each ship they finished, humanity's chances of survival grew a little better. The Wanderer had docked directly with Titan Station, allowing remnant engineers to work alongside their human counterparts. Commander Nick Stevens proved to be a master of advanced technology and could explain the quantum modifications in terms that human engineers could understand. His people had been fighting the Zephyrians for centuries and knew exactly what was needed. Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the command center with Commander Jake Harrison watching the retrofit operations through the main viewing ports. Her ship's sensors were monitoring deep space for any sign of the approaching Zephyrian main fleet. The readings were getting stronger, which meant the enemy armada would arrive soon. Lieutenant Amy Foster was coordinating the defense preparations from her tactical station. 7 human ships had been successfully modified with remnant hull technology and quantum-resistant weapons. It was not many compared to what was coming, but it was infinitely better than facing the Zephyrians with conventional human equipment. The first test of the new weapons came sooner than expected. Amy's sensors detected a small group of Zephyrian scouts approaching from the outer system. These were probably advance units from the main fleet sent to assess the situation after losing contact with the original attack force. It was a perfect opportunity to test their new capabilities. Jake ordered 2 of the modified human ships to intercept the scouts. Captain Rodriguez was gone, but Lieutenant Colonel Grace Thompson had taken command of the rebuilt heavy cruiser UES Phoenix. Her ship was one of the first to receive the remnant modifications, and she was eager to see how well they worked in actual combat. Dr. Helen Martinez monitored the engagement from her research station. The quantum-resistant hull plating seemed to be working perfectly. When the Zephyrian scouts fired their disruptor beams, the energy was absorbed and converted into additional power for the Phoenix's weapon systems. It was like watching magic happen in real time. The modified human weapons tore through the crystal scout ships with devastating effect. The Zephyrian hulls that had seemed invincible just days before were cracking and shattering under the new attack. Within minutes, all 3 enemy scouts had been destroyed without any damage to the Phoenix. Captain Vasquez nodded with satisfaction as she watched the tactical display. The modifications were working exactly as her people had designed them. Human ships now had the tools they needed to fight the Zephyrians on equal terms, but she warned that the main fleet would be much more dangerous than a few scout ships. Commander Stevens reported from the engineering deck that they had enough modified hull plating to upgrade 3 more human vessels. The work was going as fast as possible, but they were running out of time. His sensors showed massive energy signatures approaching from deep space that could only be the Zephyrian Armada. Dr. Kevin Wright was working with remnant scientists to analyze the quantum frequencies used by Zephyrian communications. If they could disrupt the enemy's command and control systems, it might be possible to cause confusion in their fleet formation. The Zephyrians relied on perfect coordination between their ships, and any breakdown in communications could be exploited. Amy's long-range sensors finally got a clear reading on the approaching fleet, and the numbers were terrifying. Over 2,000 Zephyrian vessels were heading toward the system, including dozens of massive motherships. Each mothership was larger than Titan Station and carried enough firepower to destroy entire worlds. Jake felt his stomach turn cold as he studied the tactical projections. Even with the remnant modifications, humanity had maybe 15 ships that could fight effectively. They were outnumbered by more than 100 to 1 against an enemy that had never been defeated. The odds were impossible, but they had no choice, except to fight. Captain Vasquez placed her hand on Jake's shoulder and spoke quietly. Her people had faced similar odds many times during their long exile. The key was not to fight the entire enemy fleet at once, but to use superior technology and tactics to defeat them in smaller groups. The Wanderer would lead the attack and draw the Zephyrian motherships away from the human forces. Dr. Carol Johnson had been studying Zephyrian tactical patterns and found something interesting. The crystal ships always maintained perfect formation even when taking heavy casualties. This suggested that their fleet coordination was controlled by a central command ship rather than individual captains making decisions. If that command ship could be identified and destroyed, the entire fleet might lose its ability to fight effectively. The Zephyrian Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and began forming up for attack. Their crystal hulls reflected starlight in brilliant displays of color that would have been beautiful if they were not so deadly. The motherships took positions at the center of the formation, while smaller vessels spread out to surround them. Amy ran detailed scans of the enemy fleet looking for the command ship that Dr. Johnson had theorized about. Most of the vessels looked identical, but one of the motherships had different energy readings and communication patterns. It was larger than the others and seemed to be coordinating the movements of nearby ships. The battle began when the Zephyrian fleet entered weapons range of Titan Station. But instead of the devastating assault that everyone expected, the enemy ships held their positions and sent out scouts to probe the human defenses. They had learned caution from the destruction of their advance force. Captain Vasquez seized the initiative and ordered the Wanderer to attack the enemy scouts. Her ancient ship moved with incredible speed and grace as it tore through the Zephyrian probe formations. The modified human vessels followed her lead, and soon space around Titan Station was filled with burning crystal fragments. But the main Zephyrian fleet was not fooled by this small victory. The motherships began advancing in a coordinated wall of firepower that would be impossible to stop. Their quantum disruptors charged to full power and prepared to reduce Titan Station to atoms. Commander Stevens had been working on a desperate plan with Dr. Martinez and the other human scientists. If they could overload the Wanderer's quantum absorption systems, it might be possible to create a feedback pulse that would disrupt Zephyrian shields across a wide area. It would probably destroy the Wanderer, but it might give the human fleet a chance to escape. Jake refused to consider sacrificing their new allies, but Vasquez insisted that her ship was built for exactly this kind of mission. The Terran remnant had been preparing to fight the Zephyrians for thousands of years, and this was their moment to strike back. She would not let her distant cousins face extinction when she could prevent it. The Wanderer moved to intercept the advancing Zephyrian motherships with all weapons firing. Its hull began to glow as the quantum absorption systems worked at maximum capacity. The ancient ship was taking enormous amounts of punishment, but continued its attack run toward the center of the enemy formation. Amy watched in fascination and horror as the Wanderer fought its way through wave after wave of Zephyrian defenders. The ship's hull was beginning to show stress fractures, but its weapons never stopped firing. Captain Vasquez and her crew were making the ultimate sacrifice to protect humanity. Dr. Johnson suddenly realized something important about the Zephyrian command ship. Its communication patterns matched those of a hive mind rather than individual intelligence. The entire fleet was being controlled by a single consciousness that coordinated every ship simultaneously. If that consciousness could be disrupted, the Zephyrians would lose their greatest advantage. The Wanderer reached the edge of the Zephyrian mothership formation, and Captain Vasquez gave the order to initiate the feedback pulse. Her ship's quantum systems overloaded in a brilliant flash of energy that washed over the entire enemy fleet. For a moment, every Zephyrian ship stopped moving as their coordination network was severed. Jake ordered all human ships to attack while the enemy was confused. The modified vessels charged into the Zephyrian formation with weapons blazing. Without their perfect coordination, the crystal ships were much more vulnerable, and several motherships were destroyed in the first few minutes of the assault. But the victory came at a terrible price. The Wanderer was breaking apart as its overloaded systems failed one by one. Captain Vasquez managed to get most of her crew to the escape pods before the ancient ship finally exploded in a burst of quantum fire that lit up half the solar system. The explosion disrupted Zephyrian communications for several more minutes, allowing the human fleet to press their advantage. But Amy's sensors showed that the enemy was already beginning to recover from the feedback pulse. Soon they would regain their coordination, and the battle would become much more difficult. Jake realized that this was their only chance to win the war. The Zephyrians were confused and vulnerable, but not for long. He ordered every human ship to focus their attack on the command mothership, while the enemy was still recovering. The Zephyrian command mothership loomed ahead like a crystalline mountain floating in space. Lieutenant Colonel Grace Thompson pushed the Phoenix harder than the ship had ever been pushed before. Her modified weapons were charged to maximum power, and every system was running beyond safe limits. This was humanity's one chance to end the war, and she was not going to waste it. Commander Jake Harrison watched from Titan Station as the human fleet converged on their target. The Zephyrian hive mind was still disrupted from the Wanderer's sacrifice, but the effect was wearing off quickly. Individual crystal ships were beginning to move again and form defensive positions around their command vessel. Lieutenant Amy Foster coordinated the attack from her tactical station while monitoring the recovery of enemy forces. The feedback pulse had given them maybe 10 minutes of confusion, and half that time was already gone. If they could not destroy the command ship soon, the Zephyrians would regain their coordination, and the battle would be lost. Dr. Helen Martinez was analyzing the quantum signature of the command mothership and found something unexpected. The vessel was not just coordinating the fleet, but actually containing the collective consciousness that controlled every Zephyrian ship. It was like a massive brain, made of living crystal, that could think with the power of thousands of individual minds, working together. The Phoenix reached weapons range first and opened fire with everything it had. The modified quantum cannons tore into the mothership's hull, sending cracks spreading across its crystalline surface. But the ship was enormous and heavily armored. It would take concentrated fire from multiple ships to break through its defenses. Anikai, other modified human vessels, joined the attack as fast as they could reach the target. Captain Sarah Williams in the UES Defiance and Commander Mike Turner in the UES Liberty added their firepower to the assault. The command mothership began to return fire, but its movements were still sluggish from the disruption to its controlling consciousness. Jake could see that the battle was turning into a race against time. More Zephyrian ships were recovering from the feedback pulse every minute and moving to defend their command vessel. Soon the human fleet would be surrounded and outnumbered by thousands to one. They had to destroy the hive mind before that happened. Dr. Kevin Wright had been studying the data from Captain Vasquez's sacrifice and discovered something important. The Wanderer's overload had not just disrupted Zephyrian communications, but had actually damaged the quantum matrix that held their collective consciousness together. The hive mind was wounded and struggling to maintain control over its fleet. Amy reported that several Zephyrian motherships were moving to intercept the human attack force. The crystal giants were accelerating to ramming speed and would reach the battle zone within minutes. If they could not finish off the command ship before those reinforcements arrived, the human fleet would be crushed. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson made a desperate decision. She ordered all power from the Phoenix's life support and defensive systems to be routed to the weapons. It was a death sentence for her crew if the ship took any significant damage, but it might give them enough firepower to crack the command. Mothership's armor. The Phoenix's quantum cannons began firing at twice their normal output. The beam weapons cut deep into the crystalline hull of the command ship and reached the quantum matrix at its core. For the first time since the battle began, the massive vessel showed signs of real damage as sections of its hull began to collapse. Dr. Martinez detected massive energy fluctuations from inside the command mothship. The hive mind was losing cohesion as its physical matrix took damage. Individual Zephyrian ships across the fleet began to slow down or change course randomly as the controlling intelligence weakened. But the Zephyrian reinforcements were almost in range and the human ships were running out of ammunition and power. Jake realized that they needed one more sacrifice to finish the job. Someone had to get close enough to the command ship to deliver a killing blow directly to its quantum core. Commander Nick Stevens had survived the destruction of the Wanderer in an escape pod and been picked up by one of the human ships. He volunteered to pilot a modified shuttle loaded with quantum explosives directly into the heart of the command mothership. It would be a one-way mission, but it might save humanity. Jake wanted to refuse the offer, but there was no other choice. Stevens knew remnant technology better than anyone and had the best chance of penetrating the mothership's defenses. The shuttle was quickly fitted with the most powerful explosives they could find and launched toward the enemy command vessel. The Zephyrian ships tried to intercept the shuttle, but their coordination was breaking down as the hive mind weakened. Stevens piloted his craft through the defensive fire with incredible skill, while the human fleet provided covering fire. He managed to reach the mothership's hull and found a breach created by the earlier bombardment. Amy tracked the shuttle's progress on her sensors as Stevens flew deep into the crystalline interior of the command ship. The readings showed that he had reached the quantum core at the center of the vessel. A few seconds later, there was a brilliant flash as the explosives detonated directly inside the hive mind's physical matrix. The effect on the Zephyrian fleet was immediate and dramatic. Every crystal ship stopped moving as their controlling consciousness was destroyed. Without the hive mind to coordinate their actions, the individual vessels were helpless. They had no independent intelligence and could not function without the collective that had guided them. Jake watched in amazement as thousands of Zephyrian ships went dark across the entire battle zone. The greatest threat humanity had ever faced was finished not by superior numbers or firepower, but by courage and sacrifice. The children of Terra had proven that their spirit could not be broken no matter what the odds. The surviving human ships began the long process of securing the battlefield and rescuing survivors. Many good people had died in the battle, including Captain Vasquez and Commander Stevens. But their sacrifice had saved not just humanity, but probably countless other species that the Zephyrians would have destroyed. Dr. Johnson established communication with some of the remnant escape pods that had survived the Wanderer's destruction. Captain Elena Vasquez was among the survivors, though badly injured. She smiled weakly when she learned that the battle was won and said that her people's long exile had finally found its purpose. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson brought the Phoenix back to Titan Station for repairs and found Jake waiting for her in the docking bay. The battle had cost them dearly, but they had achieved something that no one had thought possible. The Zephyrian threat was ended, and humanity was free to explore the galaxy without fear. Amy began coordinating salvage operations to recover useful technology from the derelict Zephyrian ships. The crystal hulls contained advanced materials that could be studied and reverse-engineered. Humanity would emerge from this war stronger and more capable than ever before. Dr. Martinez started planning joint research projects with the surviving remnant scientists. There was so much they could learn from each other about quantum physics and space travel. The reunion of humanity's separated branches would lead to incredible advances in science and technology. Jake stood on the observation deck of Titan Station and looked out at the debris field where the greatest battle in human history had been fought. The cost had been enormous, but they had proven something important. No matter how advanced or powerful their enemies might be, the human spirit would never be broken. In the weeks that followed, news of the victory spread to every human colony in known space. The war was over and humanity had survived. New ships were built incorporating both human and remnant technology. Exploration fleets were launched to search for other lost branches of the human family that might be wandering among the stars. Captain Vasquez recovered from her injuries and was promoted to admiral in charge of the new combined human fleet. She worked closely with Jake, who had been given command of all human space forces. Together they began planning the next phase of human expansion into the galaxy. The Terran remnant decided to end their long exile and establish permanent colonies near human space. After thousands of years of wandering, they had finally found their way home to rejoin the family they had left behind so long ago. The children of Terra were united once again. Dr. Wright led teams of scientists who studied the remains of the Zephyrian hive mind. They learned that the crystal beings had once been individual creatures like humans, but had given up their independence to become part of a collective consciousness. It was a warning about the dangers of sacrificing individual freedom for the promise of perfect order. Years later, when Jake had become an old man, he would often stand on the observation deck of whatever station or ship he happened to be on and remember the day when humanity faced extinction. They had been outnumbered and outgunned by an enemy that seemed invincible, but they had something the Zephyrians could never understand or defeat. The human spirit was unbreakable. It could bend under pressure and seem ready to snap, but it would always spring back stronger than before. That spirit had carried them through the darkest hour and would carry them to whatever challenges waited among the distant stars.